I'd like to welcome everyone to the Board of Curators meeting, including those listening online. As a courtesy to those listening online and those here in the audience, I'd ask that all the participants please speak into the microphone so that everyone can hear. Our first order of business is under general business is a resolution to go into executive session of the Board of Curators at a point later in the day. We have some executive session items we need to take care of. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cupps?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator
Aye.
Steelman? Curator Stewart?
Aye.
All votes in favor?
The next item is the consent agenda that is in the materials. If there are any items on the consent agenda that a individual curator does not want to take up as part of the consent agenda, please express an objection now. Hearing no objection, then we will take up all of the consent agenda items tomorrow morning. The first item of business is the Compensation and Human Resources Committee, and I'll turn the meeting over to Curator Phillips.
So the last time we met, we had talked about perhaps being able to come to a conclusion and act today on the retiree medical benefits, which I think that previously we identified as a major expense and of increasing expense unless some modifications are met. Betsy Rodriguez, Vice President of Human Resources, has been working with various constituencies and is going to remind us of the increasing liability and also of her work trying to bring some consensus so that we could have a decision. It is not an action item for today, but rather an informational item. So we'll hear from Betsy and then have questions.
Thank you, Curator Phillips. Just as a reminder, in April of 2014, we had an ad hoc task force, the Total Rewards Task Force, and they had 8 recommendations, and one of those was to do a review of the retiree medical benefit program. So we began doing that in December. We've done numerous listening sessions, both with retirees and employees, and we've also engaged some consultants to help us with actuarial analysis and to help us look at what's available out in the marketplace. I gave you an update on this in June. I'm going to give you some additional information and update today. We expect to bring a final recommendation to you at either the December or the February board meeting. One of the reasons, really the biggest reason that we're not bringing a recommendation today is that the Total Rewards Advisory Committee, which is a committee of faculty and staff, felt very strongly that they wanted more time to look at this. And when the president heard that, he was very happy to let them have that time. So they're actually meeting today and tomorrow and going through all of the information that we have on the actuarial analysis, and they're going to also consider some recommendations. So we felt it was very important to get them comfortable with why we need to make a change and what the different options might be. So we're going to spend some time letting them do that. So let's just review quickly why we need to do this. So the number of retirees are growing. This is not unexpected, of course. It's due to the baby boomer retirements, but it is also because of increased life expectancy. This is a good thing for all of us, but it is people are living longer than what was predicted even 20 years ago, so that has had an impact on the cost. Also, the retiree marketplace is changing dramatically, and I won't go into any detail about that today. I talked a little bit about that with you in June, but let's just suffice it to say that the market has really evolved. It's quite robust for those that are Medicare eligible. So if you're over 65, there's a very robust market with very good choices and, frankly, lower costs than what we offer today on our plans. However, as I mentioned before, for the group that's 55 to 65, so not yet Medicare eligible, it's much more of a challenge for us. The marketplace is still developing, and we do have a number of employees who retire before 65. The other thing that's happening in the marketplace is Medicare is changing, and Medicare is evolving and covering more things than it covered even 10 years ago. And one of those is the pharmacy benefit. This is a big reason why people take a insurance benefit on top of Medicare, is to cover the pharmacy benefit. And Medicare is going to be greatly expanding that in 2020. But by far the biggest reason that we have to look at this is this last bullet. And this has to do with the accounting standards. It's our government accounting standards. And it not only requires that we book this liability, and we've been doing that for a few years now, it also requires that we pre-fund that liability. And as I've mentioned to you before, our current liability is at $808 million. We don't make payments on that like you might do on a mortgage. So, and that's very common. That's how most employers go about this kind of a benefit. So that's what's really creating a problem for us. This would be new funding. Vice President Burnett would tell you that we've been booking this for a while on our books, so people are well aware of this, but rating agencies are now looking, what's your plan? What are you going to do about this growing unfunded liability? And that's really what we need to work on. But first, let me just quickly review for you what is our current eligibility and what drives our current cost, our annual costs on this. So basically, to be eligible for our retirement benefits, you have to be retirement eligible on the pension plan. And the pension plan retirement eligibility is that you're 55 with at least 10 years of service, or you're 60 with at least 5 years of service. That's early retirement. Full retirement is that you're 62 with at least 25 years of service, or you're age 65 with at least 5 years of service. This is pretty generous. It's not necessarily generous for retirement benefits, because the retirement benefits are driven by how many years you've been here. So obviously, if someone has less years of service, they're going to get a lower benefit. But these are also people that are now eligible for lifetime retirement insurance benefits. And that's what makes this cost a problem for us. Also, spouses are generally eligible for lifetime coverage, and the cost of it is based on the subsidy that we pay. So what we do right now is we offer a % of the premium, so we share in the premium cost with the retiree based on their age and years of service at retirement. So it varies for each retiree, but in general, it's about 50% of the premium. Overall, for all the retirees, we're paying about 50% of the premium. Contrasted to employees, we pay about 73% of the premium. So we are paying less for retirees, but we're still paying a pretty substantial amount on an annual basis. And that actually adds up to $29 million annually.
So Betsy, if we had a employee retire at age 55, then we would be essentially paying half of the health insurance.
It's based on their age and years of service. So if someone's 55, they likely have probably only about 10 years of service with us, maybe a little bit more. So it could be as low as 10% of the premium. It could be 20%. So it's based on a calculation. Does that make sense?
It does. So if you had someone that had been there, 30 years and retired at age 60.
They'll get up to 70. So the highest they can get to is 73%. They can't get higher than what an employee gets. So we basically use the rule of 90. So if someone had age and years of service that equaled 90, the maximum benefit they could get from us would be 73% of the premium. So we have a number of people that do get there, and then we have a number of people that are much less than that, and that's where we end up with that average of about 50%.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh. So what plans are they eligible for? And they're eligible for, if they're 55 to 65, they're eligible for our current employee plans. So even though they're retirees, because they're not Medicare eligible, they're on our plans. So they get the same premiums. Now, as I mentioned earlier, they might get less of the premium paid by the university, but they are on the same plans with the same premiums. And that's another issue that we have. They actually are much more expensive to cover than an employee. So they do drive up the cost on our employee plans as well. Those that are 65 and over can choose between two plans. We offer kind of a standard plan that pays in addition to Medicare, and then we have a high deductible plan. I want to mention briefly that we do offer dental, vision, and life insurance to retirees, but we make very small contributions toward those, and those are not anywhere near the cost of medical, which is why we've been really focusing on the medical plans. So what happens if, let me first cover the goals of the study, and then I'm going to talk to you about what happens if we do nothing. So we have two basic categories of goals. First, we're trying to protect as much as possible the people that have already retired, that made decisions to retire based on things that they were offered at the time. So we're trying to preserve coverage and the subsidy for the current retirees, and if possible, for employees that are close to retirement with long service. We're also trying to ensure the stability of our current plans. We're seeing rising costs on our current plans, and we're seeing some things out in the marketplace that might be better for our employees, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. On the financial goals, because I told you that a big driver of this is the cost to the university, we need to stop the growth of the liability, and we need to reduce to the extent possible the cash that we're putting out on an annual basis. So if we do nothing, if we maintain where we are today, that $800 million liability will be $6.2 billion by 2030. That will be much larger than the university's overall budget. That's obviously just something that we just can't deal with, and that is a B, not an M. It's billion. In 10 years, just to put this in cost perspective, in 10 years we would have to raise the amount that we spend on benefits from 28% to 35%. So what that means is right now we pay 28% of someone's salary toward benefits. That covers retirement plan, it covers their medical insurance, it covers unemployment insurance, worker comp insurance. All the benefits that they have are about 28%. If just to maintain the retiree medical insurance the way we have it today, we would have to increase from 28% to 35%, and every percent is $12 million. So, what do we do about this?
Betsy,
Well,
can
yes.
I ask you to remind the listeners in the audience that the Total Rewards Task Force that we put together last year, when looking at the cost-benefit analysis of this, plus other medical pension programs, compensation programs, what was the guidance that they gave us relative to the priority of this, as well as the guidance that they gave us relative to the percentage of compensation that we should target for all benefits?
So they had a couple of critical points there. What the task force said is try to maintain the current flat rate of 28%. And the reason is the second thing they said. We want a good balance between pay and benefits. And we know that we have some market issues in some areas on pay, and if we keep spending more and more money on benefits, we're not going to be able to address our issues on the pay side. And they felt like we have gotten out of balance over years, or we maybe have considered these things separately and not thought of them as combined. So that was very important, is to try to maintain that 28%. The other thing they said is, we believe what we've learned as a task force, that there are some things out in the marketplace that could actually help us in this regard. And I'm going to talk about those now as we talk about retirees. So they wanted us to keep that balance of the 28% and consider the pay and benefits balance, and they wanted us to see what's out in the marketplace. So for current retirees, we want to continue we think it's important to continue the coverage. We think it's important to continue the subsidy. However, we think it's equally important to explore market options. And so we are actually in the process of going out to bid and looking at plans for our current retirees. Our preliminary research has shown us that we believe we can actually lower the premium substantially for both the university and the retiree. So here's an example. If the current premium is around $300, it's actually a little less, but I'm going to use round numbers. If the current premium is around $300 and we're paying half that, paying $150, and we could go out to market and find a premium with the same value for $200, then both the employer and the retiree would come out ahead. That seems kind of impossible from what we all know about medical care costs, but we feel very confident. And one of the reasons is this third bullet up here is that Medicare has done some really interesting subsidy arrangements with certain Medicare Advantage plans. And through those subsidies, you're able to get very good coverage with a pretty substantial reduction in cost. The Medicare Advantage programs of 10 and 20 years ago were not as well thought of, but these are very broad network plans and are very well rated by various groups. So we just want to go out there and see what's available and see if we can get a better rate for our retirees. We don't plan to take away coverage for them. We don't plan to reduce what our percent of the premium is, but we do want to see if we can get a better deal for them. The harder question is, what do you do for future retirees, which is what's really driving that increasing liability cost. And this is where we are today. This is where we are still evaluating what to do, but I'm going to give you a few numbers that really help explain the cost. So we have about 19,000 benefit eligible employees. 8,400 of them have more than 5 years, so they're vested under the retirement plan, but they're not retirement eligible. But many of those 8,400 are very close to eligibility. Then we have a group that is eligible for either the full or reduced benefit, those eligibilities that I showed you earlier, but they have less than 20 years. And the reason we showed you this number is because when we talked to employee groups, we said, what's long service to you? How would you define that? And everybody in general agreed it was about 20 years. So we have 3,200 people that have less than 20 years with us, but could leave with a retirement benefit. Then we have another 1,800 who are at least age 60 with 20 years of service and fully retirement eligible. So if you group those last two lines there, you have about 5,000 employees that are essentially sitting today with a retirement benefit. They're not retired, and that's really that bubble in the snake. That's the group that is really driving this liability cost. So when you start talking about how to change the eligibility or how to reduce the eligibility, it gets very difficult. Where do you draw that line? And this is what we've asked the Total Rewards Advisory Committee over the next couple of months to think about, is figure out what makes the most sense. If we do make changes, how much notice do we give people? Where would you draw the line? Who would remain eligible? Who would not remain eligible? These are very important questions, not just from a cost standpoint, but people make plans. And we want to make sure that we're giving people notice in terms of making this really important, critical retirement decision. So we will be working on this and hopefully bringing you something in either December or February. I'd be happy to take questions.
On that last slide,
Can you go back for me to the last slide? Thank you.
so is the thinking, let's just use 20 years as an example, and I understand that isn't fixed. But is the current thought that would be a snapshot of those who, at this point in time, or whenever this is effective, have 20 years to be eligible? Or is it that when employees are eligible for retirement and have 20 years, they would be eligible? In other words, will it disenfranchise people who haven't hit the 20 years to implement to some extent?
We've looked at almost every scenario you can think of, and I'd say there's kind of two schools of thought around this, Curator Phillips. And one school of thought is that we do create some kind of a grandfather group at around 20 years, and what would be the age that you would pick. So that's one school of thought. Another school of thought is to pick a date certain in the future and say anybody who's retired by this date would continue to have this benefit. And that's really what the committee is evaluating over the next few months, is which way do you go? Do you try to create some kind of a group that would be eligible almost regardless when they retire? Or do you pick a date out in the future and say anybody who retires by that date could have the benefit?
The first slide, and you don't need to go back to it, set how many years you have to have in to retire early. And as I was seeing that slide, it reminded me that we're actually granting some pretty fabulous benefits to people who've only been with us maybe 5 years, because they get the same currently retirement benefits
Correct.
as somebody that's been there 25 or 30 years.
Yes, and it's
that's-
very generous. Compared to our peers in particular, it's very generous.
And they can actually go on and double dip. Somebody could retire at
Yes.
55 and get another job for 15 years, and yet access at an appropriate time our retirement benefits.
Yes, that's one of the downfalls when you're when you have a more generous plan than other people, is you do end up with people who maintain the benefit here and can go on because they can't get the benefit somewhere else. One of the struggles that we have on communicating and educating employees is, particularly post-65, it's not that important to have employer-sponsored retirement medical. But when people have something and it's taken away, they place a big value on that. So we have to help people understand that that's not a big value. You all could go out today and purchase a very good retiree medical program on your own. But we have to show people that. It's the show me state.
I have
Other-
oh, no, you're good.
Go ahead.
Well, I have a question about the proposed timeline, even though I understand that it's still an open discussion and the task force is discussing this issue, but I was wondering if any thought was given to the proposed date of January 1, 2017, given that, like, that's when we're going to have a new president and new leadership in the government. I guess my question is that an ideal date if Medicare is a topic of, platforms during this election season, and if we might be adding extra stress to potential retirees who are going into the election in November, may or may not be pleased with the result and may not have enough notice to retire before January 1.
I'm really glad you brought that up. Let me clarify something.
Okay.
The January 1, 2017 date only applies to current retirees, and it's
Okay.
not changing anything for them other than the kinds of plans that we offer.
Okay.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I really meant to make that point. We get a lot of confusion around that. So you have current retirees and you have future retirees. And the 2017 date is when new plans for current retirees will be in effect. And that's a pretty minimal impact on the current retirees and really no impact on future retirees. So we have no date right now for future retirees. We've thought of a few things, but we're letting the Total Rewards Task Force really work on that. So I really appreciate you bringing that up because that has been a confusion. Anything else?
I have a
Yes.
question. On a lot of other measurements, we're looking at, on the various campuses, at peer groups around the country and so forth. Have we done the same thing in the benefits area as to the 28%? And how have you compared those to other peer groups?
Sure. I'll start with the 28%. So the cost that we have for benefits is very competitive. In public sector, you'll see people getting close to 30%. In private sector, 28, 27% is about average. So we feel like we're right in the mix. And the Total Rewards Task Force, when they wrote their report, put that in the report. They said, yeah, that's why they thought we should maintain that percent, because they thought that was very competitive and was the right amount of money. We could move it around within the 28%, but they thought that was the right amount. In terms of retiree medical for our peers, it's a little harder to get our arms around, but we have looked at it a lot. The problem is that a lot of our public peers use state benefits, and many of the states are still offering this benefit, including our own state. But when you look at Arkansas, Nebraska, Kansas State, they all eliminated this benefit for future retirees a year to 5 years ago. So it kind of varies, but clearly our eligibility is very generous. Among those that do offer it, we have very generous eligibility. But even when you look at who offers it, we're seeing a dwindling number of people. Everyone's being hit by the same accounting standards. And so I think in the next 5 years, you'll see a major shift away from this benefit.
So you're seeing a trend towards not offering the benefit then? Is that
Absolutely.
correct?
About every few months, we hear another university is reducing the benefit or doing away with it. And the private sector did away with this 10 and 20 years ago. You see very few large corporations that offer this benefit anymore.
So is that one of the possibilities at all, or not?
To not offer the benefit? Yes, because for people that are post-65, there are very good options out there. We're still kind of concerned about what to do with the people that retire before 65. So we need to make sure we consider that when we do it. But yes, that's the way most people are going, is they're figuring out a date certain or a grandfathering group, and they're saying, after this point, we will no longer offer this benefit.
Could you do that and then say, and by the way, the current cost is $200 per month per employee, and we will add that to the contribution to your 401K if you're here then, or some, not take away
Yes.
the money, but just say, we're getting out of this business, we want to leave you whole.
Absolutely, and that's one of the considerations that the task force has been told to look at is, could there be some kind of a payout on that benefit? Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that's all that we have in open session under the compensation and human resources, and we would move to go into executive session. Excuse me, make a motion. We're not going to go into executive session, but we need a motion for executive session for that committee.
So move.
Second.
Curator Covington? Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
And Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Okay, all votes in favor.
So committee moves to.
Next is the Academic Student External Affairs Committee. Curator Stewart?
Good morning. The Academic Student Affairs, External Affairs Committee is in session. We only have one item on the agenda for today. It's information only. There is no information on the external affairs, but I do want to share something with you. I heard the other day that Ronald Reagan quoted that relates to the external affairs. It said the government views of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. So the University of Missouri system is on the move. And so, welcome back, Hank Foley. I guess it's official now, right? You're in good health and things are going well. We're going to talk a little bit about the Missouri Innovation Center Accelerator Program.
Okay, thanks very much, Curator Stewart. Will you be advancing these, or am I? I am here. Okay, thanks. All right, so what I'm going to describe to you, as Curator Stewart said, is information only. It relates to action item number 2 under the Finance Committee agenda later today. Brian Burnett, our Vice President for Finance, will cover it there also. And what we're talking about, what I hope to give you is just a brief statement of what and why as it relates to that action item. And the action item is to change one of our CRRs, 140.120, which is our investment policy for the general pool. What we'd like to be able to do is to allow for investments in things like an accelerated fund. And I'm going to explain what an accelerated fund is and who's running it, and hopefully leave you with some clarity as to why we need to make this kind of a change. And all of this aligns with our strategic planning, both in terms of leveraging system resources to support campus strengths, but also to try to drive up entrepreneurship, innovation, job growth, and really put the university and its neighbors in the community in a place of strength with respect to being an engine for innovation. Okay, so the key points then are the following. We're going to be talking about an accelerator fund that will begin and start in the Missouri Innovation Center, the MIC as we call it affectionately. The MIC is a separate 501c3 from the university with its own board and its own CEO, Bill Turpin, who I'll have more to say about in a moment. The change in the CRR will allow the general pool to invest its capital in this kind of venture. It's similar to what we do right now. We have 35 private equity investments that total about $250 million in the retirement fund and the endowment pool. But a venture fund is more risky. It will have a program cap, as Brian has suggested, along with Tom Richards, of $5 million. And our first tranche of funding we propose to come from funds that we've accumulated from proceeds on our intellectual property. So I'd be happy to explain that to you offline if you want, how we would do that. Brian can do it better than I can. But really the focus here today is to make it possible for us to transfer some of those proceeds into this fund, which will be run by the MIC. Or the University of Missouri, will not be making direct investments in companies. It would simply be making an investment in the accelerator fund. What is an accelerator fund? I've tried to illustrate that for you here. Let's assume we have an innovation or a discovery at one of our campuses. We take that innovation and discovery, bring it closer to reality, if you will, through incubation. We have an incubator. We have several other incubators besides the MIC around the state at some of our campuses and elsewhere. Hopefully that results in a NewCo, which is a new company, shorthand, sorry. And that new company then is hopefully going to be one that will eventually turn into an IPO or turn into a revenue-generating enterprise. The problem is that there's something called the Valley of Death. And the Valley of Death is illustrated here as that gap between that new company at pre-revenue and where it needs to get to essentially as an entity that can gather capital. That's where the accelerator comes in. This is typically a place or a thing or a fund that brings together expertise, venture mentoring, and a small amount of additional capital to get the NewCo through that Valley of Death and to the other side, so it's far enough along to be able to garner follow-on investment support, Series A, Series B support, things like that. So these are well known. They're done around the country. They're done everywhere. And we haven't had one yet in the University of Missouri. So this will be our first, or at least our participation in the first one. The mission statement of the Accelerator Fund, and I'm sort of speaking for Bill Turpin here, is to provide then capital and startup expertise to entrepreneurs who are launching market-changing companies in mid-Missouri, and to do so with professionally managed funds that will provide sustainable return to investors. So we're really talking about a different thing now. This is not something that's philanthropy. This is not something that's not-for-profit. Although the MIC is not-for-profit, there will be a wholly owned subsidiary underneath it, which will be for-profit. And we've been working with Polsinelli on this, and I believe one of our Polsinelli attorneys is here, who's been working on how this is structured with Bill Turpin and the board of the MIC. On that board, there are multiple people from the University of Missouri, but we do not control the board per se. Who's Bill Turpin? Bill Turpin is a gift from the gods, quite literally. Bill is a highly successful entrepreneur who also happens to be a highly motivated and very loyal alum to Mizzou. Bill graduated at the top of his class, summa cum laude, in 1978 in electrical engineering. He went off to Texas, met his wife, worked at Texas A&M, and then sometime around 1985 or so, he quit and started to teach himself programming. The rest, as they say, is history. He moved to the Silicon Valley. While he was out at Silicon Valley, he was involved in several startups. One of them was called Netscape. You may remember Netscape. And he cashed out there and did very, very well. He's been with Kleiner Perkins. He knows those people. He knows Vinod Khosla. He's very, very highly connected into that whole network of people. So we're really lucky to have him here. I don't really quite understand why he came back, but I'm really glad he did, and I just don't question it. We just say he's one of those angels that appears every now and then, literally and figuratively. So he's back here. He's working on this, and here's the opportunity. We see numerous successful companies that have started in mid-Missouri, but because they get to the NewCo stage and they're on the edge of that valley of death in mid-Missouri, we haven't had the capital and the expertise to keep them in mid-Missouri, so we tend to lose them. But at the same time, because we're giving our faculty permission all around the system to become more innovative and to become more entrepreneurial, we're seeing a lot more startup activity. This has been particularly true in Columbia, where we've seen Mizzou Startup Weekend and other things of that kind. But there's very little, as it says here, in the way of early stage capital. And in particular, what Bill is focusing on in the neighborhood of Mizzou right now is, in fact, digital startups. Why digital startups? Well, digital startups, frankly, are pretty exciting because you don't screw any capital into the ground. You buy a few servers, and most of it's intellectual capital. And if you get a win there, then the return on investment is incredibly large, as opposed to fields like the one that I've spent my career in, where you have to put a tremendous amount of capital on the ground, bolt it down to cement, and then hope that the venture works. Here, you don't have that. These are, in many ways, virtual companies. One example of such a company that was highly successful for MU is Newsy. And some of you live in Columbia and know that company. Now they had cashed out for something like $40 million. That was a net win of sizable proportions for the university. So what he'd like to do is to, in fact, bring more of these out of the university and like. But let me also say that this is an accelerator that he runs, which is not the MU accelerator, it's the Missouri accelerator. So if something comes from Columbia College, for example, that would fit. If something comes from Moberly Community College, that could fit. If it's something from UMKC or UMSL, if they saw a reason to come out to Columbia, that would fit. But certainly anything from Rolla would fit as well. So it's not MU specific, and as I've said before, it is a wholly owned, separate company from the university. The investment model is private sourcing at the early stage. He's going out to investors that many people in the community know, who are quite wealthy and who are quite excited about this because they know Bill and they trust him. There's a multi-stage screening process that will be put in place. They'll then make pre-seed, there'll be a board to do this. They'll do pre-seed investment, qualified opportunities, somewhere between $25,000 to $50,000. The first generation of companies then might be on the order of 20 to 30 companies. Out of that, he hopes to have 2 winners. If we get 2 winners that sell out for $20 to $50 million, then that money will be divided up among the investors for profit, but it will also go back to the university if we make an investment in it, and some of it will also go back to the MIC. At that point, then, we could start a second generation accelerator, which will be hopefully even better and larger, and we'd like to start to hit the various areas that we think are really important to mid-Missouri and like. And that's going to be not just digital, but eventually we will go into more capital-intensive areas such as the plant sciences, advanced manufacturing, and the like. But we want to start, and he wants to start strategically this way. The great advantage for us in doing it this way is that Bill essentially will take no money other than the costs that it takes to run the operation through the MIC. So normally, if we were doing this with a private firm, they would be taking 20% or something like that. That's not going to happen here. So he gets his salary, and on top of that, anything that he might invest, he might get some value added back from that. But the point is that this is going to be low cost to the inventors, and the emphasis is on trying to get to success. So to make all of that happen, and Brian can explain this far better than I can and will, we need to change the CRR. We need to change the CRR and relax it so that we could take some of these proceeds that we have from intellectual property, and we had a big win this past year. There was a court settlement in our favor. I can't really say much more about it because of the agreement around that. And so we have some capital that we'd like to move into this fund to help get it started. It'd be about $1 million. Once we've done that, then others will follow on, but it's important for us to be there with that first tranche of funding. That's it. Thank you.
So, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I'm sure.
Okay.
I yield to you.
And actually, it sounds fantastic, almost too good to be true. What other universities are doing this kind of thing?
Well, you know, the University of California system's doing it, and they're doing it, what was it, Tim, at $200 million level or something? I mean, this is tiny, but it's to dip our toe in the water and to get started. So every school that has a fair amount of intellectual property and research and development is trying to go in this direction, David. 2 reasons. One is we're finding fewer and fewer companies. In the old days, Monsanto would come to us and say, we think that patent's interesting, we'd like to license it. And, you know, we might make $100,000 on the license and feel like winners. Today, what they're saying is, please get that technology closer to the marketplace, de-risk it, and even if the company's pre-revenue, if we like it, we'll buy it. And that's where really the money is to be made. And that is the alternative source of income that we were looking for last year and into the future.
When I first met with you, you talked about the fact that the licensing doesn't really pay off the way that we need it to, and this is part of that
That's correct.
transition to where we have equity, to where we
Correct.
get like a University of Wisconsin or a Florida.
Correct.
on the-
That's what we're trying to do.
Do Wisconsin or Florida do anything like this in startup?
Yeah, they do. But they've had a couple of big wins, Warfarin being one of them. So Wisconsin has an enormous amount of money to put into this. And of course, Florida had Gatorade. We need our Gatorade. And, but no, quite seriously, we have some things in the pipeline that look pretty exciting. They won't be that big, but, you know, wins in the $50 million range are really good starts for us. And we've had some of those, and we'll have more. And I think once that starts to take off, then this thing builds on itself.
So-
Other questions? Yes, Tom?
I understand it at the Mizzou campus. How will it relate to S&T, UMSL, and UMKC? Will the same availability be across the system?
So it's available to anyone. There will be a board that will determine whether or not the project fits and whether or not the company fits. But it does not have to be from MU. Here, speaking frankly, here in UMKC and Kansas City and UMSL and St. Louis, they have a lot of places they could go. So how attractive this would be to them, I don't know. It could happen. I would think for all it might be quite attractive.
But isn't it in our interest that it is attractive to UMKC and UMSL?
I've got to let Leo decide how to answer that, because here's the problem. No one wants to lose a startup that looks exciting from their region. So if we were to start bringing, which probably won't happen, bringing companies to Columbia out of St. Louis or out of Kansas City, there would be friction politically.
Well, so we wouldn't invest, say, the UMSL company said, we're going to set up a mile from the UMSL campus. So this wouldn't invest in that company?
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably because what's been happening is we've seen net outflow of companies from Columbia to St. Louis, for example, for the Arch grants, which were about $25,000, and not the other way around. On the other hand, if it were a digital startup and they saw value in coming to Columbia because of the Reynolds Center and because of the journalism school, could happen. In fact, they could come from anywhere. They could come from elsewhere in the United States.
But why wouldn't we invest in the company that is, and I use the term we because
Yeah.
we are investing in, what is the MIC, is that what it
It's
is?
the Accelerator Fund, yes.
Okay. Why wouldn't MIC invest in the company that was going to stay in the North St. Louis area?
So probably the most important determinant to success in getting across this valley of death, besides the tranche of money, is expertise and mentoring. So if they don't come to Columbia to get that expertise and mentoring, they have to be part of the accelerator. It's not just an investment. It's an investment of money, but it's also an investment of expertise. So they have to be local, right? So that the people who made the investment are watching them, are mentoring them, and seeing where it's going. We would be very unlikely, I mean, it's not just a fund, it's an accelerator. We'd be very unlikely to, in fact, we won't, it wouldn't happen that we would make an investment remotely. They'd have to come here and be part of that team. So part of it, what you also want is you want these groups to get together and create sort of an intellectual ferment and a business ferment among these people, and they help to teach each other and drag each other forward. So if it's something out in the hinterlands, now, we wouldn't, not that St. Louis is the hinterlands, but if it's something, something
from
far from the
Cassville, St.
accelerator.
Louis is the
Hey, can I get off the stage now? Do you understand what I mean, though, quite seriously? Yeah, it's a good question. So it's not just a general fund. It's very specific and very highly managed.
What does coming to Columbia mean? We all know of a digital startup that started in a garage that did pretty well. Does it mean that you have to have your company and its employees there?
You know, these companies are usually very small at this point, so that might be 1 or 2 employees, typically young people. Yes, it would mean that they would be in the incubator, and they'd be part of the incubator. Bill would be watching over them, and the mentors that are there would also be a part of that. Yep.
You know, the Valley of Death in these startups exists everywhere.
Yes, it does.
Even in St. Louis, Kansas City, and Rolla. Why wouldn't you open it up to and have the board decide which ones appear to have the best opportunity?
We would, but they still have to come to where the accelerator is.
Because they couldn't get mentoring
Correct.
from the campus where
That's
they
right.
are?
Because
S&T
there's a responsibility that has to be maintained between those who receive the funds and those who give the funds, and it has to be managed. Now, when I say we're again being kind of a little loose in our language. It's a separate 501c3. It's not the university.
I think it's a great idea. I guess I have to give some thought because I think mentoring does exist on the other campuses and could be coordinated through Bill or whoever Bill hires. But I think it's a great concept.
Thank you.
Can I just,
I would, please go ahead.
please?
Go ahead, Dave.
Mr. President?
Sorry.
What's interesting about this opportunity is that it's going to attract dollars, but those that invest in the Accelerator Fund are not just investing from their pocketbook. It's the intellectual investment that they're making, and hopefully, at least the people that we're talking to, we're attracting entrepreneurs that have been successful and have survived the Valley of Death and are looking at getting a return on their investment, but also spawning off these new businesses that creates a more healthy economic climate. Most of these investors, though, are going to be in central Missouri, but we're not the board makes the decision in terms of the investment. So for example, as a hypothetical, if there is a Kansas City company and there's a relationship there and they feel that they can still provide that mentoring capability and that will get them through the Valley of Death towards profitability and attracting more funds, I don't think the board is going to have that limited of a scope. But the majority of what Hank said is the mentoring is easier when your proximity geographically is closer. And so that's the difference between this fund and some other funds, which is basically throw in your money and wait for a return 5 years from now. And we don't expect you to be involved in these startups. Is that fair?
Perfect.
Let's bring some clarity. The university does have membership on the board, right?
Yes.
Okay. The other quick thing too is that you know the money is one thing, but the mentorship is probably more important than the money. And I would challenge you to not necessarily having the mentors have to be located in at the incubator with them. That we live in this digital world and this virtual ability to be able to get access to those mentors and those people who are counseling them and guiding them, that be broadened out right away, because that is a key piece to their success.
Yes, I agree.
Yes, if we can do online teaching, then we should be able to execute online mentoring.
Is it also correct, however, that part of the mentorship is business mentorship, business acumen, not necessarily subject matter driven in terms of the subject matter itself, but that there is a pre-existing structure in Columbia of business people who are in partnership already
Right.
with the incubator, who provide that extra layer of not only let's help you do something that's really, really brilliant,
Yes.
but let's make sure you don't make terrible business decisions along the way.
Precisely. I should also add that the investment that will be made initially is not a system-level investment. It's an MU-level investment. The change needs to be made at the system level because it's a CRR. So I should add that. Plus, there are several of these already in St. Louis, in Kansas City. There are accelerators like this. Probably not in Rolla, is my guess, and I think Rolla could take advantage of this. Yes?
Hank, I would agree that it sounds exciting and promising. Just a couple of due diligence questions. Who will be doing the audit on MIC who does that? And second question,
Can you help me on that?
what kind of reporting requirement is there?
All right, I'm going to turn to my friends from Polsinelli and also Ryan Rapp to help me with that answer, because I haven't actually seen the PPM yet. Ryan, go ahead.
Typically, that would be covered in the agreement with the 501c3. They'd have bylaws that would govern, and we'd have input into that, that would be on the board. So I would expect that they'll have their own separate audit done by an outside external audit firm.
So we do that now. I can't remember who the actual audit firm is for the MIC, but there is a separate audit firm, and they have separate legal counsel from Polsinelli, and have had for years. I think the incubator's been there, about 10 years now.
So are we prepared to take action on this?
I'd just like to add that if we could do this other places around the state and at other campuses, if it's not being done, we would like to do it. But it's important for us to start where we can and where there's fertile ground to do it. And it's just a gap in Columbia that's not there, that MU needs.
Okay, good. Okay, very good.
Did you want to say, did Leo want to say something?
Leo, you have some?
You pointed me earlier, and I would just say that this is a very important subject. In fact, it was just this past week that a large gathering of folks were here in Kansas City to talk about this very same subject. This region of the country is viewed as a flyover region for capital. And the problem we have here is the same one you've expressed for mid-Missouri, and that is when you have folks who are developing technologies and entrepreneurial here and they get to a certain stage of investment requirement, then it's more likely that they will go to either coast where they can get that have the presence of the mentoring and where most of the money is. So what we've been focusing on, and we've got a number of accelerators, and we have an innovation center here that's very well known in Kansas City, that's part of the university, and we have other initiatives like the digital sandbox and the like that we support. But the city itself is trying to position itself as being one of the more entrepreneurial, and the gap is in capital. And we had a number of funders at every level who were here last week to talk about what their requirements are.
So here in Kansas City, there are lots of resources like this. Leo has Maria Myers. We have Bill Turpin out at Columbia. In St. Louis, we have T-Rex. We have BioSTL. We have, what's the other one, Tom? I'm trying to think of. Yeah. Do you want to say something, please, about all the? Oh, okay. So there's a lot of infrastructure in the two cities. There isn't much infrastructure in between for Rolla and Columbia, and this is sort of a first step to getting us there. Dr. Lofton, did you want to add anything, or are you good? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Very good. All right, ask for a motion to adjourn the committee?
Good.
Okay. Call for the roll?
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Stewart?
Aye.
Okay. All votes in favor?
It's time for the audit committee, and I'll turn the meeting over to Curator Henriksen.
The audit committee has one information item and two action items today. The information item is the quarterly report and the 6-month audit follow-up report, and Ryan Rapp, our new internal auditor, will review that for us.
Thank you, Curator Henriksen. Let's see. I will go over the recently completed internal audit reports. Since the last report at the June meeting, 4 PwC internal audit reports have been completed, and 1 report is in field work. I'll briefly review each of the completed reports and provide an update on the status of prior audit findings. The 4 audits I will review today include 3 healthcare audits and 1 related to the University of Missouri St. Louis campus. The first audit was a review of the HR recruitment process. The review covered pre-posting through the offer process for MU Healthcare. Overall, the results support this process works well with some opportunities for improvement. Specifically, 3 medium risk areas were noted that focused on improving communication and training for hiring managers, adjusting the recruiting process to improve efficiency, and sharing information with department managers regarding the recruiting process. The healthcare team's already taken steps to address these areas. Are there any questions regarding this audit? The second audit focuses on the Missouri Institute of Mental Health at the University of Missouri St. Louis campus. The focus of the audit was on fiscal controls around revenues and expenses. Overall, Missouri Institute of Mental Health met the test objectives conducted by PwC with 1 medium risk and 2 low risk items. The 1 medium risk item was a recommendation to improve the collection and monitoring of accounts receivable for the events hosted by Missouri Institute of Mental Health. Missouri Institute of Mental Health, along with the finance team at the UMSL campus, is already addressing these areas. Are there any questions? The third audit focused on the University of Physicians and the use of the correct billing code based on the location of the services provided. Overall, this audit met all of the test objectives performed with no high or medium risk recommendations. Any questions? The final audit was an information security assessment for the Department of Radiology. The PACS system stores patient images and is a significant part of the MU healthcare operations. The audit was performed as the university is preparing to transition to a new service provider for this system and wanted to understand what opportunities for improvement might exist. The audit highlighted 3 areas for improvement that were noted regarding administrative access controls and the process around escalation for technical issues that are identified. Are there any questions regarding this audit? If not, I'll move into discussing the status of follow-ups on prior audit findings. Follow-ups are performed only on high and medium risk audit findings. Overall, management has appropriately addressed past audit findings, with over 93% being considered closed. Only 2 items were past due and were related to the HIPAA high-tech security assessment. I have met with management and the IT team at the healthcare system, and they are in the process of addressing these issues, and we would anticipate at our next follow-up report these will be addressed adequately.
May I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding the color coding, that was not viewed as a high risk, but a medium or low risk.
That is correct.
I thought that if HIPAA violations were systemic as opposed to just an occasion, that it was a substantial liability. I would have thought it would have been a high-risk area. And why has it not been dealt with before now?
Okay. These were not actually HIPAA violations identified. These were just opportunities to improve processes that might help us prevent HIPAA violations. So there was no violation noted in the audit.
I'm talking about the risk, though.
The risk, yes. Why was it assessed as medium?
Right.
I think largely that's weighed in how likely do we think, what is our true exposure? Is there actually a violation that's occurred? Do we anticipate that a violation would occur? And I think the assessment was made that these are probably things that might be viewed as a best practice, but not necessarily something that they viewed as a direct concern, is why it was assessed as a medium risk finding.
Okay.
Any other questions? The next slide, just as we've already gone over, just presents a visual summary of the status of follow-ups. Are there any questions regarding this slide? Any questions with the quarterly update report?
Our next item, we have an action item to review the internal audit plan for 2016.
So I will briefly, I don't have any slides, I will briefly speak to the internal audit plan. It was developed largely by going around, conducting interviews with the president, the chancellor, other general officers and senior leaders across the university. As you can see, as we've discussed previously, approximately 80% of the plan is focused on audits. 20% will be consulting projects. It provides us with a total of 40 projects that we will try to complete in fiscal year 2016. Additionally, we looked at the PwC risk assessments that had been conducted in the past, and the healthcare risk assessment was considered as well. This is the plan as of today. One thing I want to be clear on is we know that will change as the senior leaders of the university and the board all have input into this and can request audits throughout the year. Going forward to FY17, we will typically bring this plan at the April meeting, and it will be approved and driven by an enterprise risk assessment and the university's audit universe. Are there any questions regarding the plan?
If there aren't any questions, may I have a motion from the committee to approve the audit plan as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Cindy?
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Stillman?
Yes.
Curator Stewart?
Yes.
Okay, all votes in favor?
Mr. Chairman, I move the 2016 internal audit plan to the full board for approval.
Second.
Any discussion? Cindy, would you call the roll?
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Stillman?
Yes.
Curator Stewart?
Aye.
Okay, all votes in favor?
Thank you. Next, Ryan's going to present us with the charter for the internal audit unit.
Thank you, Curator Henriksen. The internal audit charter is a foundational component of an effective internal audit department. It serves to establish our mission, defines independence, and sets the authority and responsibility for the internal audit organization. We developed this charter in compliance with the professional standards, as well as reaching out to other colleges and universities. We were actually able to confirm this with some of the best practice in discussion with some of our other higher education peers this week. As far as the charter itself, again, it was developed looking at other higher education institutions and what their charters look like, as well as the Institute of Internal Auditors. Are there any questions regarding the charter?
May I have a motion out of the committee to approve the charter?
So move. Second.
Cindy?
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Stillman?
Yes.
And Curator Stewart?
Aye.
Okay, all votes in favor?
Mr. Chairman, I move to the board approval of the internal audit charter.
Or second?
Second.
Discussion? Not, Cindy, call the roll?
Curator Covington?
Yes.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes.
Curator Stillman?
Yes.
Curator Stewart?
Aye.
All votes in favor?
And I need a motion from the committee for a resolution for executive session later this afternoon.
So move. Second.
Cindy, would you call the roll, please?
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Stillman?
Yes.
And Curator Stewart?
Aye.
Okay, all votes in favor?
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the public business of the audit committee.
We're about 30 minutes ahead of schedule.
It's a miracle.
How did that happen?
Probably, I don't know.
Only you could do it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. It would be my suggestion that we go ahead and recess and go into executive session and begin on the audit committee executive session, and then we will come back into open session at 12:15 p.m. So, okay. We are now recessing the public session until 12:15.